There have been so many books that are based in World War II and that deal with the themes of war that when I picked up the book An Empty House Doesn't Sneeze by David Scott Richardson, I was actually wondering how the author could stand out among so many different books that are set in the same premise, somewhat deal with similar themes. When I read the title, An Empty House Doesn't Sneeze, I thought this book was going to be humorous because it was from children's perspective, like the main protagonist is a 15-year-old boy, and the other aspect of it is just the name seems funny, and so I thought like the entire narrative was going to be humorous, even though the book is set in World War II. My expectation was something like Jojo Rabbit, but I did not know what I was getting myself into. First, let me paint a picture for you. So, this book is narrated through the eyes of 15-year-old boy Scotty, who's the protagonist, and it is set in 1943 in Seattle. On one hand, World War II is going on, and that creeps into the entire atmosphere of the book. But on the other hand, because the story is told from the perspective of a 15-year-old boy, he mostly wonders about, he mostly looks at things from his own worldview, which is very centered around his own family and his own very immediate life. This is a time period where, as narrated in the book, there are a lot of blackouts happening. The family is dealing with a lot of stuff. There's an uncle who has yet to come back, and he's also part of a lot of conversations, and just that feeling that you never know what's going to happen next because there's a war happening. But also, what's interesting about this story is like the way the plot moves forward. It is turned into a sort of mystery because suddenly during blackouts there's somebody who's just committing arson, and everybody's trying to find out who this person is because it puts their life in jeopardy, and it's just amidst like this larger, grander, like a more broad idea of a major war happening, and the little everyday life. It's made out to be like a story of a mystery where somehow these kids also get involved and try to find out, try to investigate who this firebug person is who's setting fires. And what I really adored about this book was the prose, because I absolutely loved the family dynamics and the way Scotty had conversations with his sister Greta, and just generally Greta's perspective on things was so refreshing and so interesting to read about. There's this one bit where Greta, I think, mentions that somebody who invented board games must really be thinking about life in bomb shelters, because how many times can you play Chinese checkers and still care about winning? And then there's other stuff where the book just oscillates between different things. Like on one hand, there's this looming fear as soon as the air sirens go off, and on the other hand, there's the everyday life that these people are just trying to live. Where, say, there's like division of duties, like who's gonna do what house chores, and then an entire piece about Greta thinking about cockroaches, and it just the writing was so beautiful that it made the experience of reading this book all the more better. And that was what was refreshing about this particular book, because I've read a lot of books set in World War II. There's too many of them to count, but it's really hard to bring some fresh perspective and something refreshing about a time period regarding which a lot has been written already. But this book is not necessarily just a World War II novel. It's also somewhat a mystery novel because of the mystery of the firebug thrown around. It's also a coming of age novel because this entire childhood experience that Scotty, Greta, and the big brother deal with, it somehow ends up impacting their life. And the story is also narrated the way as if like somebody who's much older is like recollecting what happened in the past. And so it does show how all these little things that you don't really realize matter so much in the moment do in fact impact you much later in life. And even though I think a direct comparison with the movie Jojo Rabbit would not be okay, because like that film has a very different tone to it, but I do think that even in this book the author tries somewhat to maintain a light tone and throw in humor wherever he can, because you're talking about teenagers, and teenagers having conversations, no matter what insane setting they'll be thrown into, will have some sort of lighthearted humor in it. And there are so many chapters in which you realize that these are just kids. Like this one chapter where Scotty wants to catch a fish and is completely obsessed with the idea of catching a big fish. And then when he ends up catching a big fish, it means a lot to him. And you realize, oh, yeah, this is exactly how kids are. And the same way, when they have many conversations, you realize that the perspective of a 15-year-old is going to be much different than the perspective of somebody who is much older, wiser, and is more aware of about what's going on. Like, these are people who are still dealing with their own selves and going through a transformation in their own lives, and then suddenly they're thrust into this weird, insane world where there are bombings and there's blackouts and this entire mess going around them. What do you expect? Like, it's not a normal situation, and so some of their reactions are also not normal. And another thing is the character development, which is very well done. I do think that in the initial chapters where the author is still setting up the premise of what this book is going to be about, and it's very heavily detailed and it's very interesting to read about, that's my favorite part of the book, because it just throws in all these different narratives, all these different ideas, and is trying to like set up the novel and set up this premise and set up the stage for what to expect in the rest of the story. But it somehow turned out to be my favorite part. So if you're looking for a story that will stay with you a long while after you've read it, then you should definitely pick up An Empty House Doesn't Sneeze by David Scott Richardson. And I'll leave the Amazon link for the book in the description below, so do check it out if you feel like it.